Welcome to our study of the Psalms. Today we are on Psalm 15, Psalm number 15. But before we get there, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever tried to enter a professional hockey game without a ticket? Now let me tell you a story. I was at the LA Forum with some of my friends from seminary. You got to understand, this is 30 years ago, okay? And they wanted to get in to see Wayne Gretzky play a hockey game that night. The problem was that there were seven of us in the group, and they only had 6 tickets. So I told them that I wasn't that interested in the hockey game. I would sit outside and read a book on the patio of the forum, and they could go in and watch the hockey game. I was okay with that. So that's what happened. They said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure. I'm okay." So I sat on the entrance to the forum and reading my book, and right about halftime, some people came out. They had to go to something, and they slipped me their half of the ticket. So I went in, never having paid for a ticket. I went in and watched Wayne Gretzky play the final half of the hockey game. So because these people slipped me their ticket, I could go in. Now you say, why are you telling this strange story, Pastor Tim? Well, it does have something to do with Psalm 15. Psalm 15 is about entering into worship. You didn't have to get a ticket to come in here tonight. You didn't even have to get a ticket to come here this morning. But do you know that God has expectations of people who come to worship him? And that's what Psalm 15 is all about. So I'm reading Psalm 15, starting with verse 1. It's only 5 verses, verse 1 to verse 5. This is a psalm of David. Lord, who can dwell in your tent? Who can live on your holy mountain? The one who lives blamelessly, practices righteousness, and acknowledges the truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, who does not harm his friend or discredit his neighbor, who despises the one rejected by the Lord, but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his word whatever the cost, who does not lend his silver at interest or take a bribe against the innocent. The one who does these things will never be shaken. May God bless this, his holy word. To be eligible, to be worthy, to worship God was David's desire. And David asked the Lord 2 questions. The first question was, who can dwell in your tent? Now, what does David mean when he says the word tent? You have to understand that there was a day before we had these beautiful churches that we have nowadays. In fact, there was a day before the temple in Jerusalem was ever made. And the people of that day, of the people of David's time, worshiped God in a tent. Now, this was not your ordinary everyday pup tent that we have nowadays. This was a fancy tent that had walls that went all the way around like a big border of a huge area, and inside that big border of a tent, they had several articles like a basin and an altar and various other things. And then they had a huge tent in the middle of that border. And in that huge tent, they had a holy place and a most holy place. And David is asking the question, who is worthy to come into this tent to worship God? And the assumption of this question is that not everybody is worthy. Not everybody can dwell in your tent. So David was asking the question about this tent, and he was talking about the tabernacle, and this tent was where people went to worship. Then David asked this question, continued in this question with the word dwell. Who can dwell there? And David wasn't talking about living there over a long period of time or living there permanently. He was talking about people who would come for special festivals, and they would want to be at the tabernacle or God's tent to celebrate these special occasions. We've been learning in Sunday school, if you've been there, about these special festivals that the people of Israel had. And on these special festivals, people would come for a week at a time to celebrate what God was doing, and they would come to God's tent and stay there for a little while. He was saying, who can dwell or who can stay in your tent? And the second question was, who can live on your holy mountain? Now again, there was a holy mountain in Jerusalem, and everybody in Jerusalem understood what that holy mountain was. David was talking about Mount Zion, the place where Jerusalem was built around, and the place where Abraham had offered up Isaac as a sacrifice to the Lord. That place, that mountain, had been remembered where it was, and then they built a platform around the peak of that mountain, and that was the center of worship for the people of Israel. So when he says, who can live on your holy mountain, he was saying, who can come to your holy mountain for worship? Who can come to Mount Zion? And when David said, live there, he meant not like a permanent residence. He meant camping there for the special festivals. And after David asks these two significant questions, who can dwell in your tent and who can live on your holy mountain, David answered his own questions. And he answered his questions with 10 qualifications. What does 10 remind you of? 10 reminds you of the 10 Commandments, right? Yeah. And just like there were 10 commandments for the people of Israel, there were 10 qualifications for a person who wants to worship God in Jerusalem on the holy mountain in his tent. Well, you say, what are those 10 qualifications? I'm glad you asked. The first 3 of them are found in verse 2. David listed 3 positive character traits that we need to have in order to come and worship God. The first one is, this person lives blamelessly. Now, David is not talking about false accusations. Everybody, no matter how well you live, could have somebody accuse you of doing something falsely, right? You can't help that. But David is talking about a person who cannot be honestly blamed for doing wrong. This person is a good person. They're a quality person. They are a moral person. They do what is right on a continual basis, and because they do what is right on a continual basis, they are called blameless. That's qualification number one. This person lives blamelessly. Second, this person practices righteousness. You say, what is righteousness after all? Righteousness is a word in Hebrew that focuses on right relationships. The person who is righteous has a right relationship with God, and the person who is righteousness or who is righteous has a right relationship with the people around him. So if you're blameless, if you're righteous, then you can go and worship God. Third, this person acknowledges the truth in his heart. What truth is he talking about? He is talking about the truth that God exists and that God rewards those, to use the words of Hebrews, rewards those who diligently seek him. Somebody who acknowledges the truth in his heart, believes that God exists, and he believes that God wants him to worship him in an acceptable way. So 3 positive characteristics that you need to have in order to even go and worship God. You need to live blamelessly, practice righteousness, and acknowledge the truth. But then he adds 3 more in verse 3. And these 3 are stated in a negative way. This person does not slander with his tongue. In other words, you're not a person who goes around and cuts other people down. You know, I heard one about Sean. You wouldn't believe what he did last week. A person doesn't do that. A person who does not slander with their tongue does not speak evil about another person. The second characteristic, or the actually 3, 4, 5, fifth characteristic, is that this person does not harm his friend. He's not out to cut people down. He's not out to hurt people. They do not want to hurt the people close to them. Number 6, this person does not discredit his neighbor. If his neighbor did something good, then he's going to give him credit for it. If his neighbor did something that he suspected was not so good, he's not going to blame his neighbor. He's going to let the truth come out some other way. So the first 3 were positive characteristics of character. The second 3 are not a person who guards his language and guards his lips and is careful not to slander, not to harm his friend, and not to discredit his neighbor. So we have 6 characteristics so far, but that's not all. In verse 4, he gives us 2 more. Number 7 after the 6, he adds number 7 in verse 4. The person chooses their companions wisely. It says here, they despise the one rejected by the Lord. In other words, you don't hang out with people who God says are not wholesome people. When you use the term rejected by the Lord, I wonder if David was thinking about a man named Saul. Do you remember Saul? Saul deliberately disobeyed what the Lord had told him to do, not leave anything behind after their taking over of a certain group of people. They weren't supposed to leave anything behind. They were going to destroy everything. But Saul decided, well, you know what? Those sheep look pretty healthy. We should keep some of those sheep, and we should keep some of the gold. So Saul deliberately disobeyed God, and the prophet came to Saul, and Saul said, I did what God told me to do. And behind Saul were some of those sheep that he had stolen from the enemy. And the sheep went, bah! And the prophet said, what is the bleating of sheep I hear? In other words, you haven't obeyed God. You didn't do what you should have done. And it says in that text that the Lord rejected Saul. And now David is saying the person that can enter the tent of the Lord is the person who despises the one rejected by the Lord. That's not your best friend. You don't want to hang out with them. But they honor those who fear the Lord. Do you see the difference? You're not hanging out with the people who don't fear the Lord, and you are hanging out with the people who do fear the Lord. That's the kind of person that can come in and worship God. And then, number 8, he says, the person who keeps his word, whatever the cost. Have you ever made a promise and then realized, oops, this is going to cost me? You said, oh, I think the Raiders are going to win today. You said this yesterday. And then the Raiders didn't win, and you went into a bet, and now you have to pay up. You made a promise that's going to cost you something. And what David says is you're the kind of person that if you made a promise, you will keep that promise even if it costs you something. You're a person of integrity. Then number 9 and 10 in verse 5, he lists 2 negative character traits. This person does not lend silver at interest. There was a law that Moses gave for the people of God. The people of God were allowed to lend each other money, but they weren't allowed to charge each other interest for the money they lent. In other words, if I gave Sean $50 and said, go use it to help your grandkids, and he promised to pay me back, he could pay me back $50, but I wasn't supposed to expect him to pay me back $55 for a little, interest. I was not supposed to expect interest out of a brother Israelite. This person does not lend his silver at interest, and this person does not take a bribe against the innocent. In other words, you're expecting to get paid to accuse the innocent of doing something wrong. So you're not going to do that. You're not going to be a person that's out to make a buck, and you're not a person who can be bought. So these are the 10 qualities of the person that can even get in to worship the Lord. And I don't know about you, but when I look at my life, I say, that hits pretty hard. You have to be a pretty holy person in order to even get in to worship the Lord. Am I qualified? Maybe I am today, but what if tomorrow I do something against one of these guidelines? Will I be qualified then? What do I do to get in to worship God? And if I don't go in to worship God, I'm only going further away from Him by not worshiping Him. So I'm in a quandary. What do I do? David says in verse 5, the last part, David issued a promise about this person. The person who does these things, the 10 things that he just listed, will never be shaken. This person is stable. This person is dependable. This person will have the right to worship the Lord. But again, I have that question nagging on my heart. What if I don't measure up? What do I do? Is the Lord this strict? Would I be, in the words of my illustration, would I be left out of the game? Who has the right to worship the Lord? The beautiful truth of the New Testament is the Lord sees us cleansed through the blood of Christ. For that reason alone, we are worthy to enter into his presence and worship him. Not because of ourselves, but because of Jesus. Jesus is the one who perfectly meets all the criteria, all the qualifications that David put out here. And because Jesus died on the cross to pay for my wrongdoing and the times where I have fallen short of these qualifications, because of what Jesus did, I can be forgiven of my sin and I can qualify to enter into God's temple for worship. I don't qualify in and of myself. I qualify by grace. There's a beautiful song. It's called Only by Grace. And I've asked Mannix to play that for us as we come to the end of our devotional. Listen to the song and sing along if you want to.